In Orkney, we used to have an expression, "I'll be hour with the moon," meaning that I would come and visit you when the moon is full to light my way.
Well, this time on Hour with the Moon, we've got another visitor.
Hello.
It's folk festival time. Well, it won't be when you listen to this, but at the moment, it's the end of May, it's folk festival. We have a house full of folk, Biden, but I also had a visitor the other night, a dear friend of mine, Ailsa Dixon, and so we got bag over her head. Next thing she can't, she's sitting in a room full of books with a microphone in front of her.
I've been kidnapped.
She's been kidnapped. I'm bad like that. So, Ailsa, do you want to tell us a pretty bit about yourself, just to introduce yourself to the folks that are listening?
Yeah, so I'm a traditional storyteller. I'm from Aberdeenshire originally, but my dad's family all comes through Orkney and my mum's family comes from the Netherlands. And at the moment, I'm in my third year of university at Edinburgh, which is why I'm up in Orkney. I'm up with the Edinburgh University Folk and Traditional Music Society, causing mayhem and havoc across the island as we rampage with our instruments from pub to pub. But when I'm not creating havoc with my pals, I am telling good old tales, mostly from Orkney or Aberdeenshire or places that I have like roots in. I'm a kind of big believer in dig where you stand, but also stories from lots of other places. And I'm also interested in kind of more contemporary performance storytelling and applied storytelling. But yeah, I just love a good story.
Aye, and I very much approve of mayhem and havoc. The more of that, the better, as far as I'm concerned. I suppose we kind of have to bring this up at some stage, but you do have a very illustrious ancestor in your family tree.
I was wondering how long this would take. Yeah,
no, very long was the answer.
Yeah, so my dad, David, his mum was Alison. And then her uncle was George Mackay Brown. So does that make George my great-great-uncle?
Great-great-uncle.
I think it was my dad's great.
Yeah,
my dad remembered him quite well because I think he passed away when my dad was in his early 20s.
Yeah, in 1996 he died.
Yes.
So for anybody that doesn't ken, and shame on you if you don't, George Mackay Brown is probably the most famous Orkney writer, poet, writer, and he's been published all around the world in many different languages.
We have some Japanese editions of some of his books there's a bookcase at home that's just kind of the free George books that we get from the publisher or that have been handed down in the family, and I think there's quite a few Japanese editions. I remember bringing them into show and tell when I was in primary school.
Yeah, that's Alboshodo was the name of the publishing company. It was Osama Yamada is the man that was responsible for it and translated it, because he did Mermaid Bride in Japanese. He published Mermaid Bride in Japanese. But as you can see on the top shelf up there, it's all George's books.
Oh, yes.
And I've got a Japanese one as well.
Oh, nice.
Because our neighbour, Yuka, who is from Tokyo, I believe, originally, is a member of the Scotland-Japan Society.
Oh, nice.
And she contacted me about reference in George's book Vinland about a thing site, and then she knew from Orkneyology that there was more than one thing site in Orkney. But I said, well, I don't think that maybe I mean, what George is describing here is obviously Tingwall and Rendell, so don't worry about it. Just, And that information got passed on to Osama, who then very kindly sent me a copy of the translation in Japanese. So
that's lovely.
It's sitting over there as well. But anyway, enough about me, because we're here to speak about you. But maybe you want to say something about, like, thanks to COVID, really, was how we met.
Yeah. So I think I've been quite lucky. I started storytelling when I was about 14, maybe more, give or take a little bit. So I'd been telling stories for a little bit of a while with Scottish Book Trust, with the help of Scottish Book Trust and things like that. But by the time COVID came around, I had just kind of started on the storytelling apprenticeship with the Scottish Storytelling Forum, and I was just kind of starting to get a bit out of my comfort zone and do some more gigs and meet some other new storytellers. And I was really gutted when I was gutted for lots of different reasons. It messed up the last 2 years of my high school and all of that jazz. But I was really gutted that it seemed to kind of break my kind of storytelling development, because I was just I was also kind of just old enough to, like, go on the train by myself down to Edinburgh and things like that. But then the wonderful thing about COVID was that it opened up so many new unexpected opportunities to meet storytellers from loads and loads of different places, with all of the, like, the Liswiz Barns and the World Storytelling Cafe and everything like that. And were we on, was it? Oh, well, I think somebody I'd met at the World Storytelling Cafe, which is a really cool, I think it's still going, I haven't been back in ages, I think told me to come along to this, I'm trying to remember who, was it Northumberland?
Lichfield Storyteller.
Lichfield Storytellers, Zoom, and that you would be telling, and I had actually owned a few of your books from way back and beyond, so I'd read them before I knew that storytelling was a thing, because I collected copies of folktales, and I really loved folktales and fairy tales, and I'd read them all. But I had no idea that people told them until I was like 14. That was a revelation, and I don't know why it took me so long. But yeah, I came along to the Lichfield Storytelling, and I heard you tell some absolutely cracking stories. I can't remember off the top of my head what stories they were now.
I haven't a clue.
No idea. And I think I hung around at the end until a few of the other people had gone, and I was a bit nervous, but I was like, Tom, I think you're really great, and I really love your stories, and I have some Orkney family, and I really loved hearing the Orkney stories being told. Oh, I got distracted by your lovely cat.
It's not a lovely cat, It's a scabby little beast, but anyway.
Sorry. Sorry to very nice listeners, I got distracted by a scabby/lovely cat. And I think I was quite unprofessional, because I just kind of, like, went on a little 2-minute rant, or not rant, but little monologue, being like, I think your stories are really cool. And then, was it, I think a day later or 2 days later, you sent me an email being like, would you like to learn some more stories, and are you related to the Dixons of Orkney? I was like, yes, please, that would be really great.
Well, I mean, you popped up at the end, and the first thing you said was, I'm the token teenager.
Oh, yes, I am the token teenager.
And so you had mentioned that your dad was from Orkney, but I didn't know your name. I knew nothing about you, but I knew that you had this Orkney ancestry. So I contacted Kath Edwards of the Lichfield Storytellers and said, look, it would be nice to get in touch with this young woman, but I'm a bit apprehensive about, old geezer suddenly appearing on the scene and saying to, like, talking to a teenager. So, could you, like, put me in touch, or, sort of do an introduction? Because I'm getting on.
Aye.
And I'm not going to be around forever. And I thought if we could maybe pass the stories on to another generation, then that would be, because they're not going to survive otherwise.
No.
So that was the kind of motivation behind it. But then, where did it go from there?
Oh, I think you sent me that email, and I responded very, very excitedly. And then I think we had I think it was a Facebook video call or a Zoom call or something like that. And I remember you being very, very nice and saying that you just wanted to pass the stories down to me, and you didn't really mind what I did with them as long as I told them, and I could keep. You didn't want to make me into like a little mini Tom.
No.
You wanted, which sometimes happens when people pass down stories. They want to create like little mini versions of themselves, and you were very emphatically like, no, you're gonna keep being you, but I'd like you to have these Orkney stories in your repertoire. And then, especially during COVID, it'd be like once every week, couple of weeks, you'd tell me new stories, and then sometimes one story would take a little while. It would take me a while to wrap my head around the story, and I haven't wrapped my head around all of them yet, but I kind of gradually like grew up more of this Orkney repertoire. And we would chat about other things. We'd have chat about lots of kind of local history things as well as stories. And what I really loved about learning the stories from you is that you'd tell me the story, but you'd also tell me like which island the story was from and who collected it and who told it and like what families you think it was told from. And then we'd have little debates about the origins that we thought the story might have come from, and which I really appreciated. It's like to give this like much wider context for the stories, because I think that's the important thing about them being passed on, is that the stories can like live in, like you've written some of them down, they're in books, other people have read them, but I think what's important is that somebody who also knows Orkney is aware of like the context around the stories.
Yeah.
And that bit is like so that they don't just kind of float off in the world and are, well, it's like, it's okay if they end up being told by, other people who haven't been to Orkney. Like you can't stop that. But I think it's important that it's at least a few people who really know the culture and know the context and know all of the stories around the story. And it's like learning all of the stories around the story that I really like.
Well, I thought that was kind of important. I mean, from the point of view of telling a story, it's not necessary. Mm-hmm. But for the storyteller themselves, I think that it's to have that background knowledge, is good. And I mean, it deepens your knowledge and appreciation of a story. So it's not a bad thing, I think. And yeah, I just thought it was important to pass on all that sort of stuff to somebody that would actually use it. But I mean, no, absolutely, I did not want you to be a mini-me. I mean, no, you got to have your own voice. Mm-hmm.
I think our storytelling styles are, like, it's funny when I listen to you tell stories that are now like in my repertoire, and I'm like, oh yeah, it's the same story, very, very different kind of ways of telling it and approaching it, and like the stylistic, like there's some bits that are similar and some bits that are very different, and I always find that quite fun.
People say about I encountered this really strongly in the Faroes once. I was up there doing with Lawrence Tulloch, and we were trying to train tour guides to tell stories as part of a walk-in tour on the island of Sandoy. And but the problem was that Jakob Jakobsen had written the stories down in the late 19th century, and that was regarded as gospel.
Oh, no.
And you couldn't change a word, and that's like, no, that's wrong, because that's not what Jakobsen said. And I was saying, look, you get a different story from every part of the island, from different islands. It will vary from different parts of the same island, from different islands. Even within families, Cousins might tell stories
the cool
differently,
thing about stories. That's the whole point.
Yeah, there is no right way or wrong way. There is just different ways. Could not get that through at all. It was just, nope, Jacobson said, and that was it. Yeah, but so it's a double-edged sword when you write something doing. It's not the definitive version. It's that person's telling of that story at that time in their life.
Yeah, and I find that's a problem with some people thinking, especially the stories that were collected from like the West Highlands and the Gaelic Islands, and they're all collected by kind of priests or ministers or doctors or school teachers, and they all wrote them down in like the, I don't know, late 1800s, mid 1800s, and then people are like, that's the version, and I'm like, no, the time didn't stand statically still in 1850 when this priest wrote this thing down. It was different before and it was different afterwards, and also you probably took out lots of the exciting bits. So I can get a bit, I think I once got told off by a storyteller for, I can't even remember what for, I think for messing around with the Five Sisters of Kintail. And I'm like, no, it's, I can't even remember what I did with it, but I think I was about 16 at the time, and then I got a bit of a telling off. And I was like,
for me, that's shameful, because if you are telling off a 16-year-old who is just starting out on their journey in storytelling, that could be the difference between you thinking, right, I'm not doing this anymore, or just sticking up two fingers and said, well, that's my version, and if you don't like it, get over yourself,
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's...
But I still tell my version of the Five Sisters of Kintail, which is very, very fun. And I haven't got told off again since, so I think we're doing okay.
Yeah. Is there any stories that you kind of, is there anything that you would like to share with our listeners here? Because we've been talking about stories, and I don't know if you fancy telling one.
Oh, yes, I do.
But you could tell just whatever you like.
Let me have a think. I should have really had a think before.
I love spontaneity. People say, what's the title of your... if you're going to do a storytelling, what's the title of it? What's the theme? What stories are you going to tell? I don't bloody know. I haven't done it yet, I've
become the master of sending in really like vague titles. I'm doing this gig for a festival at the Edge, and they were like, you're going to do like a children's show, children's stories? And I'm like, that sounds good. And they were like, what stories are you going to tell? What's the title? And I'm like, oh, I was just going to kind of like chat to the kids and make it up. So I think it's called like, Adventure in Salt Sea Spray or something, and I'm like, anything can fit in there. I'll chuck in some pirates, chuck in some witches. It'll be fine.
I am the master of having a theme for a show and then just completely ignoring it and doing what I was wanting to do in the first place.
So valid,
And I mean, it's just, people I think understand that, and they know that I'm not going to change. And it's not being cantankerous or anything like that. It's just sometimes, depending on the audience and all, it goes in a certain direction. And you have to follow it, You go with your gut instinct. You don't know what the vibes are
going to be like until you get there. And sometimes you've had like a conversation with an audience member beforehand, and it's like sparked something up, or you've, or you saw something on the way there, or it's there's a particular kind of like weather or atmosphere in the air, and it reminds you of a certain story. But, I don't know. So I could do you. I could do you an Aberdeenshire tale as a wee one, or I could do you the first Orkney tale that I learnt from my granddad.
Well, let's do the Aberdeenshire one first, because we can do more than one story.
Yes, very nice.
And so it's from your roots of where you were born. So.
This is a really dinky story. I'm just going to give you a wee story. And it is it's the tale that I tell that is closest to where I grew up. So I grew up in this village called Cruden Bay, and it's a gorgeous wee village. It's got this gorgeous long sandy beach that's about kind of 2.5 miles long, and there's really big rolling waves, and there's a ruined castle that stands up on the cliffs called Slane's Castle. And I love... when I'm home, I'd love to go on really long walks and stand up in the dunes and just feel like the north wind just battering me backwards. The north wind is always quite violent, but if I was to walk out of my door and then up round Slains Castle and then keep going round up the coast for maybe 4 miles or so, you'd come across a wee fishing village that is now kind of attached to the town of Peterhead, but back in the day it was its own thing called, I think it's called Burnhaven. There's another wee village called Buchenhaven as well, so Buchenhaven and Burnhaven often get confused, but it's Burnhaven. And this story I was told by an old woman called Kathleen Jamieson way back in the 50s or 60s. Yeah, I learnt it from a grand storyteller called Jackie Ross. And one day, there was a fisherman called Fittie, and he came from a wee village called Burnhaven, and he had a brilliant, large family. He had 7 daughters and 7 sons, and the most wonderful wife that you would ever find anywhere in the world, and they worked incredibly hard. It took a lot of effort to raise 7 daughters and 7 sons. So every morning, as soon as the sun was just beginning to lift itself out of the North Sea, there Fittie would be, down by the shore, getting his boat ready to head out onto the water to gang fishing, because he'd fish all day and then come back, and then his wife would gut the fish and sell the fish, and his children would all help him mend his boat and tend his boat and fix his sails and fix his rope. But on this particular day, I like to think it was one of those days that you get in Aberdeenshire that I've never quite experienced anywhere else, usually at about the turn of spring into summer or summer into autumn, when there's a really thick haar that's just about to recede out of the coast, and you can see the sun getting stronger and stronger and stronger with every passing second, and the haar beginning to lessen and lessen, but it's all misty and it feels like you're walking through a cloud. So Fittie was walking down to the beach, and then he heard a strange wailing noise. It was a wailing cry, and it sounded like a human. It sounded like a young girl. It sounded like one of his daughters. So he started to run, and he ran round the head point, and he saw a rock, and sitting on the rock was a girl. He couldn't quite see her through the mist, so he walked a little bit closer, and a little bit closer, and a little bit closer. And then he saw that it wasn't a girl after all. It was a mermaid. And she had long, tangled, knotted hair, and a tail that glittered and shimmered like the skin of a herring. And she was crying. Great big fat tears were rolling down her cheeks. And, well, Fittie had heard stories about mermaids. You'd find them in the water, in the sea. And they'd sing to you, and then they'd kiss you, and they'd fill your lungs with water and drag you down, down, down into the depths. Or they'd give you 1,000 wishes, and then everything would go wrong and your life would come tumbling round about you. He'd even heard some stories that the mermaids had sharply pointed teeth under their pretty faces and would tear your neck out as soon as look at you. He'd heard lots and lots of stories, but the mermaid was crying great big fat tears, and she sounded like one of his daughters, so he said, "Quine, is everything okay? Fitzrang, lass?" And the mermaid stopped crying abruptly and looked at him, and the mermaid had heard stories too, of the human fishermen, how they would trap you in their nets and take you home with them, how they would cut off your tail or cut off your hair. But the fisherman looked like he had kind eyes, and he was smiling, and he was keeping his distance, and he didn't have a net with him, so... And she was so sad, and she said, "I can't find my comb. I can't find my golden comb, and I've been looking, and I've been looking, and I've been looking, and there's a ceilidh under the sea tonight, and everyone's gonna be there. The Selkies are gonna be there, and the other mermaids and the mermen are gonna be there, and all of the folk that live under the sea are gonna be there, and there's gonna be dancing, and there's gonna be singing, and I can't go because I can't find my comb." And then she started to cry again, and the great big fat tears rolled down her cheek, and Fittie said, don't worry, I'll find your comb." So he started to scour the beach, up and down and up and down, but he couldn't find her golden comb anywhere. And he was just about to give up when, in the ebb and flow of the tide, he noticed a herringbone. And he washed it off, pulled off the wee bits of seaweed, the wee bits of dead skin, and bits of fish flesh, and he brought it back to the mermaid, and he said, I couldn't find your comb, but I found this, and I thought maybe it looks like a comb, and I've never tried to wash my hair and brush it with a herring comb. I don't really know if it would work, to be honest. You can't see me, but I've got quite long hair. It kind of goes down to my waist, but maybe I should try. But I don't really think that a herring comb would work, but it did. The mermaid took the herring comb and ran it through her hair, and it was so knotted and tangled, but as soon as the herring touched it, it turned into gorgeous silky waves and floated down, down, down until it reached almost her knees. And she started to laugh and she said, "Thank you, Fittie, thank you so much. And now, in return, you can have a wish. You can have anything you want." And Fittie thought. And he knew the old stories. He knew that you had to be careful when you asked about wishes. So, he didn't want to ask for too much, but he didn't want to ask for nothing at all, and he thought about his children. He wanted to just say no, but then he thought about his children, and sometimes he couldn't quite give them enough food in the evening, and sometimes their shoes had too many holes in them, and sometimes his wife's dress had too many patches, and he wasn't a greedy man, so he said, "What I want is just enough. I don't want too little, and I don't want too much, but I'd like just enough to get us by." And the mermaid smiled and shook his hand and said, "Yes, you, Fittie, will have just enough to last you and your children and your children's children and your children's children's children for the rest of their lives." And true enough, when Fittie went back to his house, there was a small pile of silver sitting on the kitchen table. Not too much, and not too little. And the silver pile appeared again and again and again, and the Fittie family is a real family that comes from my neck of the woods, and they always seem to have just enough, and that's known hereabouts as Fittie's portion. That story it's a wee simple story, it's just little, and it's called Fittie's portion.
That was fabulous. And you can see now that storytelling has got a bright future ahead of it when it's got young people that are that good at telling stories.
Thank you.
Because when I was your age, I don't think I would have been half is actually an exaggeration. I wouldn't have been a kind of a 5% of that. But it's one of these things that I kind of have not a problem with, but I do think it's, people are always talking about young storytellers, like that defines you as a human being,
Yeah.
It's like if you kind of mention Kurt Cobain and you mean the left-handed guitarist, It's like,
Yeah.
what the hell's that got to do with anything? Or insert Jimi Hendrix there, depending on your age. So it certainly doesn't define you, but you do a lot of work with young storytellers as well.
Yeah, I don't think within my stories, I don't think being young defines my storytelling. I think no. I do try. It's kind of an effort to be taken seriously as a professional storyteller in the kind of storytelling circles if you're young as well. It's people define you and then they have certain ideas about your skill level and what you can do and what you can't do, and you're like, no, I'm just judge me on my skills and abilities and leave it at that. But I think being young does mean that I care about specific things that maybe older storytellers are might be less interested in. So I run this thing with another lovely storyteller called Sarah Wedderburn Ogilvie, called the School of Storycraft. We gave it a fancy name to entice the small people, which happens on school holidays and introduces storytelling skills to kids from 7 to 12. with, lots of games, lots of crafts, but lots and lots of storytelling, and really kind of like the important basis of storytelling. We do a lot about like breaking down stories into like 9 parts, like, your beginning, your middle and your end, and kind of common storytelling tropes. And we also try and teach them a little bit about the context of stories. So like telling a traveller story and then talking a bit about, the history of the travelling folk and why they're so important within the storytelling community. Or, I don't know, maybe teaching a story that's from the West Highlands, and then also teaching them a Gaelic song and talking a little bit about the Gaelic storytelling tradition and things like that. But they always have so much fun and they make so much friends. And there's some 8-year-old, 9-year-old storytellers that if you heard them, they would absolutely blow you away. And I do some work with there's a wee community of other kind of storytellers, like 18 to 25, from around the UK and Ireland, that we kind of meet up on Zoom every now and again, and kind of just support each other, and just because there's not a lot of spaces to kind of just exist for free as storytellers, to just kind of like share stories and experiences, and just kind of just being there and being like, oh, what's going on with you? Like, how is your how was this gig that you did? Did you learn anything from it? Did you make any mistakes? And just trying to like help and support each other. So my partner is a traditional storyteller as well, and she's also a young storyteller down in Wales. We joke sometimes that it's like a political alliance, like when they have the old kingdoms that are maybe at war, and then they send out the 2 like young prince and princess to get married to fix everything. There's an ongoing joke that Fee and I are like a political alliance for the great Scottish and Welsh storytelling families.
Rise up in rebellion.
I know, exactly. But yeah, that's important. And I also think that maybe I tell quite a lot of stories that to me are, I don't really want to say they're activism, because I don't know if that's the right word, but I really, really care about things like the climate crisis and the environment. And I really think that one of the biggest problems with people not caring or not acting is kind of a sense of apathy. Like, oh, well, it's all messed up anyway. There's no point. Or you don't feel like emotionally connected to the land or to the environment. And I think the thing that storytelling does is it emotionally reconnects you, because you're listening to the story, you're engaged, and it helps you really care about a place or think about an issue in a way that you might not have thought about it before, and in a way that you can like kind of shut off from the news, or shut off from podcasts, or from conversations in pubs about politics. But it's hard to like emotionally shut off from a story. So I do spend quite a lot of my time and energy telling kind of environmental stories that I try to like reconnect people with the land and try and help them emotionally care about the climate crisis. And then maybe that'll either, if they're struggling with like burnout, or if they're feeling apathy, might help like spark them into action. That's not like not kind of protest storytelling in the way like, you should care about this thing, why don't you care about this thing? But trying to just reawaken that bit of you that might have just, because everything is too much, might have just shut down. So I don't know if that's a young storytelling thing or a environmental storytelling thing, but maybe a bit of both.
To me, it sounds like a very, very wise old head on a young shoulders kind of storytelling, because of course you're absolutely correct. We are facing one of the biggest crises, the biggest crisis in the world's history since the last ice age.
Aye.
But the thing is, the monkeys did it. Yeah. We've kind of screwed up things. I mean, an example of that is when I was a kid, we used to have seasons in Orkney. We don't anymore.
Aye.
We had nice, warm summers, blue skies. I'd be working on the farm, tutting in hay and all that, and it was just, you never thought about, well, know what the weather will be like the morning. You ken what the weather was going to be like the morning. It would be sunny, because it was summer. And then in the winter, you had the geese flying south. You started getting that kind of chill in the back of your nose, that kind of irony smell that you knew that the frost was on the way. And then we would have snow and ice. I mean, not a lot of snow, but you always had snow. And these days, there hasn't been any kind of decent snow in Orkney for about 13 years.
There's been like wee smatterings, but not...
There's been sort of piles of hailstones, and there's been like slushy snow that then as soon as the sun comes out, it melts. But in the weather, in the summertime is pretty grim. I mean, it's grey out there now. It should be blue skies. And the thing is, I know a guy that was a meteorologist. He did a talk once, and he said, if you think that the summers were warmer and the winters were colder when you were young, it's not just selective memory. He says, I've got a data here from the 1960s, and that's exactly what's happened. I
think it's called shifting baseline syndrome. It's when it changes and people forget that this isn't normal. And I think such an important part of like local history storytelling is reminding people that this like isn't normal. And because humans are so adaptable and they kind of get used to everything. My partner Fionn tells this story about we have this show called Hear Us and Hasten that combines Welsh folklore with the Asapathl and the Storeworm story and the story of the Avanc from the Conwy Valley where Fionn is from, and interspersed with kind of like our own kind of personal reflections or personal stories about the places we grew up. And in that, Fee tells a story about her grandparents and her dad driving up to the Lake District and having to stop to wipe the bugs off the windshields because there'd be so many. And then she's talking about how she barely sees any, that you couldn't imagine that anymore. And it wasn't that long ago, but it's just the shifting baselines. And it's so important to tell the folk tales and tell the stories of the land and re-engage people, but also just the local history stories of how things used to be in the past, in the not so distant past, because otherwise people forget. Like our brains are so strange like that.
No, you're absolutely right. I remember when I was a kid, windscreen of your car would be covered with insects, but that's never happens anymore. But I mean, a lot of folks say, and you can write it off as being sort of slightly pretentious or whatever, but there's a lot of wisdom connected in folk tales as well.
Yeah.
And in it, there's a lot of kind of, like being respectful. I mean, that's the one recurring theme in many stories is the two brothers that go into the world, and there's the old guy and he wants to get a bite to eat and they tell him to piss off. He's getting nothing for them. But then the young one shares what he has with him, and then the guy helps them to achieve their quest. And it's just about treating people with respect, but it's also about treating the world that you live in with respect as well, and that comes across in many stories. Yeah,
I really think it does, and it's one of the things I love so much about stories is it's so connected with kind of this like triangle of like people and place and story is so strong, and everything's so interconnected. But yeah, I really love stories that I don't really like morality stories that, at the end you're like, this is the moral of the story. Here it is. There you go. But I feel like there's kind of like central themes and there's like kind of like a code of behaviour in folktales. And that if you want to be alive at the end of the story, then you have to be a vaguely nice person. And I quite like that.
Yeah, I mean, there is a lot of morality in folktales that isn't preachy. I mean, my favourite story, I adore it, is, Molly and the Trow for Shetland. Yes. And that is about treating other people, treat others, do unto others as you would have done unto yourself kind of thing. So that is a lesson for us all, and not always one that's remembered or followed. But, it does teach us to be better human beings.
I think one of my favourite stories that talks about, and I do so much work in schools that usually the teachers are often like, I want a story about kindness and things. So you're like, you're like, well, there's so many stories to choose from. But I think one of my favourite Orkney stories about kindness is Cake Cracker Nuts, which is, it's a long story, so probably not going to tell it. But I think it's such, I love the story. I think it's one of my, it's like top 3 I call them like heart stories, which I'm just like, yes, this is my story. It lives in my heart. I'm going to like tell it and retell it and retell it. And it's probably going to change and evolve as I grow and I get older and have new life experiences. Different things will be more important to me. But I just think it's so brilliant. And it's such a good example of like, I think often when there are like multiple female protagonists in a folktale, they're kind of pitched against each other. But Cake Cracker Nuts, long story short.
Oh well, I mean, don't be too hasty here, because if you would be up for it, then I would love to have it. I mean, if you're up for it, if you're not, it's fine. I might need to request your help because I haven't told it in a wee while, and your lovely listeners probably. I was up at there's a thing called the Stomp at the Orkney Folk Festival, and the band called The Chair was playing, and I think I might have gone to bed about 4 a.m. So we're gonna see how much of this I can remember. Well, the thing is, it's like riding a bike. I'm told. I've never ridden a bike, so I have no idea. But
Never been on a bike, Tom?
No, I never learned to ride a bike or swim. I was born on a farm next to the sea, but anyway.
We'll remember not to throw you into the water then.
Yeah, it's a really good idea to not throw me in water because I sink.
Okay, noted.
But Cake Cracker Nuts was a story that we worked on when we were,
yes.
This was all done on Facebook chat, I think it was.
I think it was. I think Zoom had a time limit.
Yeah. And so we would just do this whenever, like maybe once a week or once a fortnight, whenever you were free, because there was no big rush on anything. And we're sort of running through a few stories, and then I thought, Cake Cracker Nuts, she's gonna love that story.
I love Cake Cracker Nuts.
So, and I knew that you knew it, because you'd read all these things before, but I just thought that is just got Ailsa written all over it. So, and it is a very beautiful and very special, I think, story. So, have a crack.
I'll have a crack. I might.
It'll all come back to you.
It might do. It's a little, I don't know, a tagline at the start. That if I do forget, I might be like, oh my God, just give me a hand and I'll skip on to the next bit. But so.
Hey friends, I just want to tell you how much Tom and I appreciate your spending this time with us. If you've just discovered our podcast, you might not realize that we have a website too. Whether you're interested in Orkney history, folklore, storytelling, or everyday life, you'll find it on Orkneyology.com. We're also publishing some really unusual books now through our Orkneyology press. If you'd like to encourage us in our work of preserving the wisdom and heritage of older times, buying our books direct from our online shop is a great way to do that, as is sharing our podcast and our website with people who might be interested. And if you'd like to buy us a coffee or a dram, we do have a page on Ko-fi, which is spelled Ko-fi. Just look for Orkneyology. Thanks again. Enjoy.
Deep, deep down, in the way long ago, there was a king and a queen, as they often are in folk tales, and they had a daughter. And the daughter was blonde and beautiful, as they often are in folk tales, and the daughter's name was Anne. It is Anne, isn't it?
It is.
It is indeed Anne. But this is a folk tale, and as often they do in folk tales, the queen, the wonderful, the beautiful queen, sadly died. And the king, because once again this is a folktale, remarried to a tall and cruel woman. But her daughter, Kate, was different than how you might imagine from a folk tale. Kate had lots of a curly, runaway ginger hair. Kate liked to run in the puddles, and Kate was kind to Anne, and Anne was kind to Kate. They would talk for hours and hours and hours. They would go swimming in the sea together. They'd ride their horses over the hills together. They'd take their lessons together, and they'd run away from their lessons and hide in the kitchens together. And the stepmother hated this. She wanted the kingdom for herself. She wanted the kingdom for her daughter, and Anne stood in the way of this. Kate couldn't care less. She thought Anne was going to be a brilliant queen when the time came around, but her stepmother, with each and every passing day, grew more and more angry and started to plot and plan and scheme. So one day she went up to the henwife, the guidwife, the witch, who lived up the hill and around the corner from the castle. And she said, "I want Anne out of the way." All right, said the witch, taking the silver the queen had offered her and putting it in her pocket. "This is what you're going to do. You're going to send Anne up to me early in the morning. Make sure she's had nothing to eat, mind. And I promise you that when I'm finished with her, she will never, ever be queen." So the next morning, the queen shook Anne awake. Kate was still snoring and sleeping in the bed next door, and said, "Anne, I want you to go and collect the eggs from the guidwife that lives up the hill." "Okay," said Anne. I'll just have my breakfast first." No, don't have your breakfast. We'll have the eggs for breakfast. You just run along now, don't you?" So she slipped on her shoes and she ran along, but she stopped past the kitchen and she was handed a nice wee jam sandwich. So she munched away on the jam sandwich and headed up the hill and came to the witch's cottage. She knocked on the door. It creaked open, and there was the witch, standing by the fire, a cauldron bubbling away. "Come in," she said, "and have a look in this cauldron." Anne came in. I'm here for the eggs," she said. "Oh, never mind about the eggs. Just have a look in this cauldron." And she opened up the lid. "What do you see?" "I see water bubbling," said Anne. "I think that's a parsnip." "It smells nice. Did you put a bay leaf in this?" "Ah, go away and come back tomorrow," said the witch. And Anne went away. And she came back tomorrow, but this time she was wandering up the hill, and there were folks picking peas in the garden. "Do you want one of these peas?" they shouted, and Anne, she loved a fresh pea. So she went and she grabbed it and she nummed on it as she headed up the hill, and once again she opened the door, the creak, the cauldron lifting the lid, and once again, "Have you added lentils this time? It smells delicious. Go away and come back tomorrow." When she returned to the castle this time, the stepmother, seeing Anne as normal, just like usual, was furious. She ran up to the witch's house, and the stepmother shouted, "Why on earth haven't you done your job yet? What am I paying you for?" "It's not my fault," said the witch. "She must be eating next day. Tomorrow, you bring her up yourself and make sure she's not had a bite to eat." So the next day, the stepmother grabbed Anne by the wrist, dragged her up the hill, and deposited her outside the door. "Go in now," she said. And Anne went in. The door creaked, the cauldron bubbling away, lifted the lid, and out from the lid spun the great head of a ram, and Anne screamed, and there was a puff of smoke, and suddenly Anne's head had changed, had shifted. She lifted her hands up to feel her long silky hair, but she found curled horn, she found tightly knitted wool, she found a snout, she found the eyes of a ram, and she started to scream, but the only thing that came out was a bleat, and she ran all the way down the hill and into her bed and hid under the covers and started to cry. Later on, once the stepmother had finished laughing and was heading away for a walk with the king, Kate Crackernuts came into the bedroom that she shared with Anne, and she saw a shape in Anne's bed. She saw horns. Some devilish monster has eaten Anne, she thought. So she got a book, raised it high above her head, and said, "Whoever you are, get out now. What have you done with my sister?" And she started to whack the book on the head of the strange monster in the bed, but when the monster turned to face her, and she saw the great tears rolling down its face, saw that the monster was wearing Anne's dress, had Anne's legs and Anne's arms, she knew what happened. She knew that her stepmother hated Anne. She knew that her stepmother would stop at nothing to make sure Kate was queen, and so, without a second thought, she packed a wee bag, got a cloak for Anne, put the cloak hood high above her head, and spirited them away out of the castle where Anne would be safe. They walked and they walked into the next kingdom and the next, until they were hungry and their feet were sore, and eventually they came to a castle in a far-off kingdom. Anne knocked on the back door and said, "Is there any chance you might have a job going? I'd do anything. I'd sweep the..." Oh, sorry, Kate? Anne? Who did I say?
I was too engrossed listening.
No,
so,
darn.
But Kate.
It was definitely Kate. Kate knocked on the door and begged for some work. And the cook who had opened the door was kind and said, "Yes, there's a job washing the dishes, and I'll give you a wee room for you and your sister." And so Kate began her new life as a dishwasher, and her sister Anne lived in one of the little tower rooms. But as the days passed, Anne noticed that there was a strange kind of an atmosphere around the castle. It was like everybody was waiting for something, and that something that they were waiting for was terribly, impossibly sad. Everything felt heavy and thick with expectation, but when she asked people what was wrong, they'd just turn away from her. One day, though, she asked the cook again and again, and the cook said, "Well, the prince is dying. We don't know what's wrong. He's lying in his bed, stone still, and every night he seems to get worse and worse and worse. And nobody will sit with him through the night. They are all far too scared. They sit with him for a while and then they run away." That seems silly, thought Kate. I'm sure I could sit with him. She was a kind girl in her heart. So she went up to the king's hall, and she said, "I've heard that you're looking for somebody to sit with your son." "Aye," said the king. "Well, I'll do it." "What do you want for it?" said the king. "A bag of gold, a bag of silver, a bag of diamonds?" Said Kate, "Well, a bag of gold would be nice." "I think I've got this bit wrong."
She got a bag of silver the first
She got
night,
a bag of silver. Yeah, this is the bit I always get it wrong. She got a bag of silver.
Never mind.
She got a bag of silver. That's it. And so she was led up to the king's, to the prince's bedchamber. And there sat the prince. He was pale in the face. His eyes were sunken into his skull. And she settled down by his bedside. There was a fire glistening in the grate. And she sat there, as the sun slipped away down the horizon, as the clock ticked its way from 1 hour into the next. Suddenly she heard the clock strike, the bell toll, and the prince sat bolt upright in bed. "Hello," she said. "Are you okay?" But it was like he didn't even hear her. It was like he didn't even see her. He slipped on his shoes and walked down the spiral staircase into the cottage, and he says a rhyme. "Saddle me my..." What's the rhyme?
He goes downstairs and he gets his horse and his hound, and she jumps up behind him. But
Is there a
the
rhyme?
rhyme comes later when they go to
The rhyme comes later.
Yeah.
I can't for the life of me remember the rhyme.
It's Green Hill, open up and let me in. And then she says, Green Hill, open up and let me in. Let the prince in with his horse and his hound. And she says, and his lady behind him.
I don't know. I think it's because it has horse and his hound in it. And I was like, well, when he saddles the horse and his hound, he must say a rhyme then. This is what I mean. I haven't told this story in a little while.
I know.
And normally I have a little look over it.
Sorry, putting you on the spot, but can't because you're doing brilliantly.
You.
So,
okay, so. And the prince yelled, "Green hill, open and let me in. Let the prince in with his horse and his hound." And Kate Crackernuts added, "Quickly, and his lady behind him." And the how opened up, the light spilled out into the grass, and down rode the prince on his horse with his hound, and Kate Crackernuts behind him. And the fairy how was beautiful. There were tapestries hanging on the walls, 1,000 lit candles dangling in the air, and the prince leapt down from his horse and was spun away by the tallest, most beautiful, most radiant fairy in the room. She had a long, shimmering dress that looked like 1,000 cobwebs knitted together, and her hair dangled round her waist as she span and danced and weaved. And the prince, he looked entranced. And Kate Crackernuts, her back against the wall, hiding away from the lights and the dancing, heard the two old fairies, proper gossips they were, whispering to each other, "Do you see that, Prince? It's such a shame. The fairy queen is dancing him to death. He'll be dead in a week if we don't watch out." And Kate Crackernuts sat in the corner, cracking her nuts, eating them, having a wee snack, until the prince once again hopped back on his horse, and Kate Crackernuts hopped up behind him. They rode out of the how, through the glade with the hazelnut trees, back to the castle, and up again. And the prince lay down on his bed and fell straight asleep. An hour or two later, the king came and was surprised to see Kate Crackernuts, her feet up on the edge of the prince's bed, cracking the nuts one after the other, snacking away. "You stayed here all night?" "Yes," said Kate. "Yes, I did." "If you stay another night, I'll give you a bag of gold." "All right," said Kate. "I'll stay another night." Night came once more. Once again the prince, bolt upright in bed, down to the stables, horse, hound, riding through the hazelnut trees, and up until the how. "Green hill, open up and let me in. Let the prince in with his horse and his hound, and his lady behind him," said Kate. The how opened up. They went in. The prince was danced off by the fairy queen, and Kate hid in her corner, listening. And the gossip started up once more. She heard far more than she ever should about the wonderful and mysterious lives of all of the fairies down in the fairy kingdom. She heard who was kissing who was having children with who. She heard about the people's adventures into different parts of the world. But then, as she listened, she said, isn't it a shame? And that Kate Crackernuts up at the castle, if only she knew that 2 taps from that wand that wee inn is playing with, that would save her poor wee sister. And Kate looked and saw a little fairy baby playing with this silver wand. She took a nut from her pocket, rolled it across the floor. The little child looked at it. She took another nut, rolled it across the floor, and the little child shuffled towards it. She took another nut, rolled it across the floor, and the child dropped their wand, rolled and crawled towards the nuts, and started to cram them into their mouths. Kate nabbed the wand, stuck it in her cloak, and when the prince had finished dancing and was back on the horse, she leapt up behind him, out of the how, through the hazelnut glade, to the castle. The prince fell asleep. And that morning the king said, "You're here?" "Aye," said Kate. "I had a grand night. Nothing much happened at all." "If you stay another night," said the king, "you can marry the prince." "I hadn't really thought about that," said Kate. "I mean, maybe, if I want to, and if he wants to, but I'll stay another night. I don't mind." So she stayed. That afternoon she slipped away to her sister Anne, tapped her 3 times on the head with the magic wand, and the ram's head rolled off and away, and her sister was there smiling. And they hugged and embraced and talked. "What are we going to do?" said Anne. "Are we going to go away? Are we going to go adventuring? Or are we going to go back to the kingdom?" And Kate said, "Well, I don't know, but I know I need to stay here for one more night." And stay here for one more night she did. She went back to the prince's quarters, and the clock struck. He went down to the stables, horse, hound riding through the hazelnut bush, down to the howe. "Greenhill, open up and let me in. Let the prince in, with his horse and his hound, and his lady beside him," said Kate. The dancing again, the gossips again, and this time she listened as the gossiping old fairies said, "Ugh, if only the king knew that multicoloured bird, that wonderful creature, if only the king knew that just 3 bites of that bird would save his son from being danced to death." Kate looked and saw a small fairy child playing with the most magnificent bird she had ever seen. It looked like an eagle, with the feathers of a peacock. It shined iridescent in the candlelight of the fairy court. She took out one of her hazelnuts, rolled it against the floor. Again and again she rolled them, and the child grew distracted from the bird, crawled towards the hazelnuts, and Kate grabbed the bird, stuffed it under her cloak, and when the dancing was over, she leapt up behind the prince, rode back to the castle, and this time, when the prince fell asleep, she didn't just sit up with her with her legs up on the edge of the bed. No, she plucked the bird, she skewered the bird, and she roasted the bird. Again and again she turned the spit until it sizzled and crackled, and the prince began to stir. "I'd like a bite of that bird. One bite of that bird, and what does he say?
I'd love a bite.
I'd love a bite of that bird. Oh, I'd give anything." And Kate roasted the bird more and more and brought it over and gave the prince a bite. "Oh, 2 bites of that bird, just 1 more bite of that bird, please," said the prince. And the prince took another bite of that bird, and you could see the colour floating back into his cheeks. His eyes looked less gaunt. He sat up straighter in bed. He looked almost like himself again. "Oh, 1/3 final bite of that bird, please," he said. And Kate gave him 1 last bite of that bird. He chewed it. He swallowed it, and then he leapt out of bed. "Thank you," he said, "thank you so much." He had colour in his cheeks again. He was alive again. He was saved again. He swept Kate up into the tightest embrace, and when the king came in, he saw the prince and Kate Crackernuts dancing and singing and yelling and whooping around the prince's chamber. And I'm not sure what happened next, but maybe Kate Crackernuts decided to marry the sick prince, and they had a grand old time for the rest of their lives, dancing and spinning and eating hazelnuts. And maybe Anne married his younger brother, the Well Prince, and they lived long and happy lives. Maybe they went off and had adventures in some far-flung places. Maybe Anne married the sick prince, and Kate went back and ruled the kingdom like her stepmother wanted her to. And then there was a grand alliance, and the 2 kingdoms were joined, and they had a grand time for the rest of their lives. Who really knows? But I know it all ended happily.
It usually does.
Usually does.
The thing about that story, though, in the original version, is the fact that the first night she gets a bag of silver, second night she gets a bag of gold, and the king says, "What would you have the third night?" And she says, "I want to marry the prince." So she makes the decision rather than, being that kind of like, you can marry the prince.
Oh, yeah.
There's a wonderful story that Shona Lee Cumbers tells, Jewish folk tale, about the walnut girl fabulous story. And she's made for adventure. So she goes off and she saves a prince. And then the king says, oh, you can marry my son. And she looks at him and she thinks he's about to drip. And she went, no thanks.
Oh, that's amazing.
So it's lovely when you get that kind of twists as well.
I love this story. I'd always tell the ending a little bit different every time. It's been quite a while. It's quite a long story. So, and you often kind of in the storytelling world, you're told to like tell a 10-minute story, or you have to keep it short. So I don't often get the opportunity to tell it, but I think I last told it maybe to a group of school kids, and I think we paused every so often and chatted about the story, and they made this amazing bit of artwork that was kind of like a comic book that had panels from all of the different sections of the story, and it was really gorgeous. They did a brilliant job. They each chose kind of their favourite bit and drew that favourite bit, and then they kind of lined it up so you could see the story visually. And we talked a lot about how about kindness in that story. The thing I love is that like you'd expect with the setup of the story of Kate to be on her stepmother's side and also want to rule the kingdom, but she doesn't. She loves her stepsister, and that loving your stepsister is so rare. And it was so special to quite a lot of the kids in that class that I told it to, because lots of them come from families with different backgrounds, and so often you see like step families really villainized in folktales, and they really loved seeing, obviously the stepmother was still not great, but they loved seeing this like unusual sisterly relationship where they're not blood sisters but they love each other so much, and they really loved seeing that in a story. And I feel like representation is important, and sometimes in the storytelling world people are like, well, you just tell the stories as you tell the stories, and there's no point trying to like retcon in representation. But I'm like, you don't have to, like, it doesn't take much to like find a story or bring out the parts of the story that are going to be like relevant and engaging for the children in your audience, or just anyone in your audience that has had different experiences. Like it's so wonderful to like hear a folktale that's an old folktale and being able to be like, oh, me and my half brother, or we really love each other, and it's really cool to see that in a folktale. And I love that she snacks all the time. Like, I love that so much, especially when we're like, you don't get many princesses that just love a snack. I find that very inspiring.
She'd be sent with a bag of dry roasted peanuts if she was around these days. You know?
She's an icon. She is the moment. And I just love that story so much.
Do you know where a lot of that stepmother thing comes from?
No, but where does it come from?
It comes from the Brothers Grimm.
Yeah, they really didn't like stepmothers.
Well, if you read the original...
Oh, it's often just the mothers, isn't it?
It's the mother.
Yeah.
So like in Hansel and Gretel, it's the mother says to the father, you know, we've got to take the children out into the forest and leave them there because we don't have enough food. Yeah. So we'll get rid of them. He doesn't want to do it, but she's got the upper hand. She says, yeah, we do this. So you get all these wicked mothers. And then when they reprinted the book then later, by this time they had got married and had children of their own. And suddenly mothers were sainted. They were put on a pedestal. You know, the mother would never do that to her child. So it must be a stepmother that's come in, that's got no connection, no blood connection with them. But I have a copy up there of Chuck Zipe's translation of the original Brothers Grimm story, which is, some of them are a bit different. I mean, in Rapunzel, it's a fairy that takes the child instead of a witch. And the reason that she gets found out isn't because she says to the witch, "Ooh, you're heavy climbing up my hair." You know, the old Rapunzel, Rapunzel, let down your hair. And the prince has been climbing up it. And she says, "Oh, you're much heavier than the prince is." And then it's like, wicked child. In the original, she says to the fairy, "My clothes are getting tight." And then she realizes she's pregnant.
That's so much more interesting.
So then she lies in wait to get the prince, the fairy. So it's not a massive difference, but it does completely change the story.
Completely changes it.
Yeah.
And I think it's you don't often have pregnancies out with marriage in folktale, or they've kind of been like sanitized out.
They probably, they would have been.
They would have been.
Yeah.
Again, the sanitization, and I think one of the things that one of like the purposes of stories was to like have a place where you could like explore all of the dark things and like process so many of the dark things, and like the real issues are like around starvation and all of the kind of like big ugly things in the world. You could process them and think about them in stories. That's one of the reasons that it's like, I don't want to, I have quite a big inner cynic, so that always like sets off alarm bells when people start talking about like the therapeutic uses of, or I don't know, but like to a certain extent, yeah, like that's one of the reasons that people still tell stories, is to have a place when you can think about all of the horrible things, and yeah, just leave in the cruel mothers.
Yeah, I believe that after the Holocaust, they started a therapy of using folktales for the children that had survived the death camps, to try to kind of like bring them back. Because obviously so completely traumatized that they were just... They were lost, completely lost, and they weren't children anymore. They were just these husks, and they had to try to bring them back to be children again.
Yeah.
And folktales was used in that. So I am told. I'm just repeating what I've heard. But I've heard it from more than one source.
Yeah.
But I mean, the thing is with collecting folktales is that you've got to look at who was collecting them. And usually it's churchmen or teachers. So it's people who were from a figure of authority. They were from that background of being an authority figure. And when they go and ask for a story, you're not going to think, oh, well, there's this really dirty one that I know, but I can't tell that to the minister. So they give them the kind of, the sanitized versions, and they leave out a whole pile of stories which were considered to be rude, that maybe men told among themselves at work camps, chopping down trees or herding sheep or whatever. It would be banter.
Yes. Although, on the other hand, I've heard a fantastic story about Alan Lomax going collecting Gaelic songs, and was with a group of walking women, I think, on the Isle of Lewis, and was recording the walking songs. And was like, oh, it's authentic. Walking songs are fantastic. And then it was on the radio. And the thing about walking songs is that the first couple of verses are traditional, and then you just kind of riff and improvise. So on the radio was the first few verses, which were like, my sheep are dead, my husband is dead, I am sad, I am lonely, woo-woo-doo-doo-doo, Gaelic song. And then the next few verses were about the a debate about the relative sexual prowess of the American with the big nose. And then Alan Lomax's Gaelic-speaking friends called him up and was like, you need to get that off the radio now. So, on the one hand, yes, but on the other hand, there's some funny things.
Probably should explain to people that don't know that walking songs is not W-A-L-K, walk as in to stroll along,
walking
but
the tweed.
W-A-U-L-K.
Yeah.
So it's when they have the tweed and they're beating it on a table, going back and forth to shrink it.
Aye, yes. There's very rhythmic songs that go along with them that help with the... It's kind of quite often a woman's profession, so almost all of the songs are about kind of the female experience. It's quite nice.
Yeah, and soaked in peat before to get all the oil out the
very pleasant experience.
Yeah. But fortunately, they wash it before they turn it into suits, because you can imagine you got your nice new tweed suit and you go out and it starts getting warm. You won't get invited back again. But no, that's been absolutely fabulous. And so what do you think the big question, and rather a stupid one as well, but what do you think the future holds?
Oh, for me? Oh,
yeah.
Gosh.
Well, you and storytelling.
For me and storytelling. Well, for me personally, I would rather like to finish my degree. Mm-hmm. So I'm kind of doing this thing at the moment where I'm kind of compartmentalizing. I sort of, for a couple of months, I focus hard in on my degree and traditional music. And then I'm like, stories, fantastic. And then I do stories for a few months, and then I laser focus back in on my my degree. And I still do stories, but slightly less intensely. But kind of dream is keep doing storytelling, keep working away, keep developing. I'm really interested in kind of as well as just kind of telling like straight traditional stories. I'm really interested in slightly more contemporary performance storytelling. Like I feel like I'm a bit of a tree. Like my roots are really firmly in the tradition and in like place-based storytelling and in stories from like family connections or where I've grown up or spent a lot of time and told quite well reasonably traditionally, but then I have branches that go out in different directions, and some of the branches are I like telling international stories, but only when I've like maybe I've made a friend from India and they've told me a story, and then I'll tell the story that they told me. So I'm quite strict about the international. So I have like an international storytelling branch, and then I have an applied storytelling branch with the work that I do, maybe with adults with additional needs or working. I'm doing this show at the moment using the Coming of the Unicorn story and some other stories to explore ideas around emotions for young children and do lots of kind of like sensory play and song. And it's just kind of like an hour of unicorn stories where we kind of talk about like how we deal with our feelings and also have a little dance. So that should be fun. And then another branch, which is kind of more like experimental and thinking about how I can create interesting shows using traditional storytelling and personal storytelling and music and song. So I would like to develop all of my branches and my roots in different directions. And I'm really interested in museum and heritage storytelling, and a lot of my academic practice is based around material culture and intangible cultural heritage and how we can combine them both. And because I really firmly believe that like when you go into a museum or when you go into like a heritage space and you see objects, that seeing objects is great, but you need to have the wider context of the intangible cultural heritage. You need to be able to experience the songs and the stories that go along with that and give you like the full picture. So I'd like to develop my academic practice more there, or maybe end up working so this is a very rambling answer, or I'm thinking about doing a master's in museum and heritage studies and really kind of focusing on that. But for me, the storytelling future includes more stories, much more stories. My partner is Welsh, and we do a lot of storytelling together. So more stories with Fionn, more Welsh storytelling, learning more tales, and just going in cool and interesting directions. And I would love to do more applied work, because I feel like, and maybe more like, again, I don't like to use the word like activist work, but more kind of
raising awareness.
Raising awareness, or I feel like it's disingenuous to. The thing about storytelling is that you're not pretending to be anyone else. You are you, and the things that are really, really important to me shine through with my storytelling. And I feel like it's the thing about storytelling is that you can't hide who you are when you tell the story. So the things that are important to me are environmental justice and obviously feminist ideas and ideas around equality and sharing stories in ways that raise awareness or increase empathy around that. So that's kind of very much the heart of what I'm doing. So just basically just everything but more. Everything but more. That sounds about right.
Well, yeah, that's You can't argue with that, really.
Yeah.
And you can warn Fionn that when you're coming back up in August, that she's going to get the bag over her head as well,
yes.
and she will have to go through the same ordeal as
Yes.
you, sitting here getting asked daft questions by an old geezer.
Yes, Fiona's brilliant. She's similar to me. She's very much got her roots in North Wales, and she's a Welsh language storyteller as well as an English storyteller. So it's really interesting, and I've loved experiencing the Welsh storytelling scene. It's quite different to the Scottish story, like similarities, of course, but through her, like, she's come up to Edinburgh and Scotland lots and told stories with me in Scotland, and I've gone down to Wales lots with the Beyond the Border Festival in Aberystwyth storytelling and Carnarvon, and met all kinds of amazing Welsh storytellers and learnt so many Welsh stories. So I now have quite a lot of Welsh tales in my repertoire, and Fee has a good few Scottish tales in her repertoire too now. So I think that's really interesting to see where our, with me and Fionn, how our creative partnership develops, as well as, partnership.
Yeah. It's fabulous. And it's really lovely to have that connection as well between Scotland and Wales. I have to admit that I am completely ignorant of the Welsh storytelling scene. But it is something that does intrigue me, and I have Welsh folktale books and such like, and they've got some great stories.
Yes, they are so brilliant, and it's, again, they have the problem of, like, the chapel being very important and Methodism being very important, so it's sometimes a struggle to find the old good kind of pagan witchy stories. They've kind of been, like, buried under layers and layers of Christianification or moralitification, but they're there and they're brilliant. And Fee tells so many stories about cows. You won't be able to get... She loves an oxen. All of her stories seem to have oxen in them.
She'll fit in with Orkney fine, then.
It's brilliant. Her dad
cows.
named a cow after me, and I wasn't entirely sure. My initial reaction was, okay. And then Fee was like, no, it's brilliant. He only does this with, like, people that he likes. And I'm like, okay, good. So now there's a Dexter cow running around North Wales called Ailsa, which is very sweet.
It is. Oh, wonderful.
Sorry, this is a bit of a side tangent on this Orkney podcast.
No, we're not parochial here.
Okay, good.
We're very international in our look. But I think I've probably tortured you for long enough.
Thank you,
Ailsa. But
it's lovely to chat.
If you hang around, there's a plate of leek and tatty soup with your name on it, if you would like a plate of soup.
Yes, please. I was swimming this morning in the sea, and it was very cold. I would love some soup.
It is very cold.
It is very cold.
Yeah. Even in the middle of summer, it's freezing.
Yes, it doesn't feel like the middle of summer.
But Ailsa Dixon, thank you so much for being here, for being our visitor in Hour with the Moon. And it's just such a pleasure to hear you telling stories. And the fact that you are working as well with kids in school. And, it's making sure that the stories continue.
Yeah.
And that is really important.
That's the important thing. And thank you so much for being very enthusiastic and kind to a very, very excited teenage. I'm no longer the token teenager. I'm 21 now. But thank you for being very kind to the token teenager and telling me tales.
This next month is the 40th anniversary of my 21st birthday.
That's a weird way of saying you're what, 40? Wait, 61. Yes.
That's what I have decided. It's just the 40th anniversary of my 21st.
That's a good way of saying it.
Yeah, because then you don't cringe so much.
Yes.
But thank you very much for coming, and we will see you again soon.
See you in August.
Right. Take care.
The first story I think I ever learnt was a version of Tam Bichan and Dingus Howie. Well, I'm pretty sure I remember my granddad telling me, or telling a very short version of one day when we were driving past Dingus Howie when I would have been maybe
maybe 5 or maybe 6. I remember earlier in the day we'd gone into the garden and had pulled carrots out from the ground and brushed the dirt off and eaten them. So around about the age when that seems like a very, very exciting thing to do. But I love, love, love the story of the Fiddler of Dingus Howie. And I tell a different version of it now, but I'll try and tell you a version as close to the one that I remember Grandad telling me as possible, which is quite short and sweet. And so there used to be this fiddler, and he was called Tam Bichen. And Tam Bichen, he was an amazing fiddler. He was the best fiddler. All the ceilidhs and the parties and the weddings and the funerals in Orkney, you had to have Tam Bichen there playing his reels and jigs, or it just wasn't a party. And his favourite thing to do, above all other things, was to take his fiddle and to go down to the shoreline and to play in time with the wind and the waves. And one day, he was playing his fiddle, and it was probably the solstice, or near midsummer, or the sun was high up in the sky in the evening time, like it does in Orkney. It gets to almost midnight, and you can still see the sun up in the sky. So it was one of those nights. And Tam Bichen sees a trowie coming towards him. And now trowies are a wee folk about the size of my knee, and he's got this great big long white beard that goes right down to the floor and a bright blue jacket on. And the trowie asks Tam if he'd gang down to the trowie mound, to the howe at Dingus Howie with him, and whether he would play the fiddle for the summer ceilidh for all the other trowies. And in exchange he'd give him as much beer as he could drink, as much whiskey as he could drink, and a great big bag of gold. And well, Tam Bichen likes beer, and Tam Bichen likes whiskey, and Tam Bichen likes gold, so he says, yeah, of course. And then he walks towards that mound, that howe at Dingus Howie. And as he walks towards it, he sees it split open, and light falls out, spilling out onto the ground, and he goes down into the mound, down underneath the earth, and there's candles on all the walls. It's this great big earthy room, and there's a bit of music playing already, and the trowies are all dancing and drinking and eating, and he puts his fiddle up on his chin and he begins to play, and it's the best he's ever played. Tunes he didn't even know come into his fingers, and he's playing and he's absolutely loving it, and he's drinking down his whiskey and he's drinking down his beer, and he's having an absolutely grand old time, and the trowies are dancing in and out around his legs, all around the room, and eventually the night ends. And he's handed his great big bag of gold, and he heads out, and he watches as Dingus Howie, as the howe closes up behind him, and as the laughter and the music fades. And then he walks home. And as he walks home, he begins to notice that some things are not as they were. He was sure that that field used to be full of wheat, and now there seems to be sheep there. And he was pretty sure that there's a dry stone dyke there where they shouldn't have been. And he's walking and he sees maybe there's a house there that shouldn't be there, or that church's door, that kirk's door is painted a different colour, and he comes to his own house. And out of the door comes a woman holding a baby, and he's pretty sure he would have remembered a woman and a baby in his house, but he doesn't recognise this woman. And there's a young man that comes out and sits beside her, and he's asking them, "Why on earth are you in my house? What on earth are you doing?" "This is our house," they say. "What on earth are you doing?" And that's how Tam Bichen finds out that he's been gone 70 long, long years. There's one or two of his friends that he knew when he was young still dotting about the island, but they're old men now. And there's a great big sadness washes over him. And he does a wee bit of work, and he's still playing his fiddle at the ceilidhs and the parties, but he can't really get into it anymore these days. And he starts to go on really long walks, and one day he goes on a really long walk and he never comes back. But the people around Dingus Howie think that he probably ended up back in the fairy mound, back in that howe. And if you go to Dingus Howie when the sun is just right and the wind is just right and the tide is just right, you're probably going to hear Tam Bichen playing. And when I think Grandad told me this. I think he said, be careful playing around the tides, because there was once this fiddler, and then he got stolen by the fairies and trapped under a hill. I think that's how Grandad told it. But more or less, that's how I remember it.